Our first ever three-way shootout, a basically stock TRX-4 Defender, an SCX-10 3, and a brand new, fresh out of the box Element Ecto. The TRX-4 Defender, never regarded as skinny here at 8.66 pounds, which is just a hair shy of 4 kilograms, followed by the SCX-10 3 at 7.7 pounds, or 3.5 kilograms. And lastly, the Element Ecto at 5.2 pounds, or 2.35 kilograms. The TRX-4 Defender is using a Holmes Hobbies Crawlmaster Sport 8-turn. It's 5-pole, just like the rest of the motors in the contest here. It's got changed bumpers and I think caster blocks, but that's about it. The SCX-10 3 was built from a kit, so it's running a Hobbywing 1080p speed control and I think a Holmes Hobbies motor as well. The servo is an $20 Amazon special. Lastly, the Element is completely stock out of the box with the full complement of reed electronics. Which brings us to our first obstacle, basically unnamed area I simply call the Waterfall. A relatively easy ascent up the western face. First out of the box will be the TRX-4, who makes fairly short work. The portals and overall weight makes it pretty easy to ascend a surface like this. Next up is the SCX-10 3. It's a fairly similar story. It's relatively heavy. It's got portals. The tires grip well enough, so it just shoots up pretty much like the TRX-4. And third up the hill is the Ecto, who suffers a little, I think, from the combination of the lighter weight. The factory tires are a little harder, and as I mentioned before, no portals. Moving on to a bit of a harder line. This is around 40 degrees at the steepest point of the face, and it's pretty rough. The weight of that Defender body really works against the TRX-4 on terrain like this. It's not really its specialty. But again, if the weight can push the wheels down, it can pretty much go where you want it to go. The SCX-10 3 is a similar story. It's heavy-ish. Its center of gravity is higher than some others. Its ground clearance not quite as good as the Defender, but in the right line, it behaves similarly. It has some issues on this particular ascent. The rocks are pretty jagged and it takes a quick trip to the bottom. The Ecto, despite the much stiffer stock tires and not having a lot of weight to push them down, and also not having portals to help it clear some of the obstacles, makes pretty easy and short work of this ascent. It just mostly shoots up to the top. Third up is an even steeper, but I think higher traction line. It's not as knobby or broken compared to the Waterfall area. The TRX-4 does better than I had anticipated here. It just claws right up that. There's a portion of it that's nearly vertical, but again, weight can be a benefit. The SCX-10 3 does equally well, perhaps a little better. Took it a little more quickly. And then the Ecto, again relying on its lighter weight and much lower center of gravity, just claws right over. Here on to the next obstacle, what I would consider to be the Achilles heel of the TRX-4, particularly the Defender, which is side hilling over uneven terrain. It just doesn't really care for it. The weight of that big body just moves the center of gravity so high that no matter where I tried to run this line, it wasn't gonna have it. So I try to give them 3 tries, but I just moved on to the SCX-10, which that little bit lower center of gravity just goes right on. Go across the side hill, ring it around the little outcrop, and run it straight back. Not the fastest at navigating this particular obstacle, but it was pretty sure-footed during the whole traverse. And again, the final run of the obstacle, the Ecto, which has far and away the lowest center of gravity, and really just went around this without any drama. The lack of portals doesn't hurt it at all here, and in fact is probably its biggest helper. This is traditionally one of the more difficult obstacles to navigate. I don't know if it was the way the concrete's set or the way the rocks are placed, but it just, the angle of it hangs up on everything, and it generally takes a couple tries to get to the top of this. But today was the TRX-4's day. It struggled a little getting past the rocks, but once those front tires got a little bit of bite, it was just straight up and over. The SCX-10 struggled with this one a little. I was surprised a bit, because I expected with the higher center of gravity and the greater weight of the TRX-4, I thought the SCX-10 would just breeze this, but I don't know if it was the tires or the gearing or the weight or geometry, just something about it. It wasn't as happy running that same line, which is, I mean, it's a tricky line, but I expected the arguably more capable vehicle to manage it easily, and it, as we see, it did not. But I chalk most rollovers up to driver error, so I was just going to go back and try it again. And the SCX-10 manages it on the second try. Again, last up the hill, the Ecto, who I think here suffers from, I don't know if it's the tires that are just harder or if it doesn't have enough weight to press them down, but it doesn't seem to have as much just raw traction as the other two. Now, it's outweighed by 2.5 pounds in one case and almost 4 pounds in the other, but it definitely has to claw a bit more to get its tires to hook in. But once it does, it makes relatively short work of it. Moving on to a section I call the Sleeping Giant. This is, I would say, much more difficult than it appears. It's not a long climb. It's not exceptionally steep, but the orientation of the round rock is just really difficult, and the top isn't flat at all, as you'll see here. TRX-4 found out the most difficult way, the way down. So I give it another try, because like I say, most rollovers I chalk up to driver error. I did something I probably shouldn't have done. So getting around the corner, not too bad. Have to throw it in reverse a couple times. It's steeper than most things want to turn with locked differentials. I left the TRX-4 locked the whole time because the other two vehicles don't enjoy the ability to unlock theirs. Little nice save by the TRX there at the end. Next up, the SCX-10 who I'm really seeing more and more of that small reduction in center of gravity makes a huge difference. It behaves much more nimbly, even though its raw turning radius, I don't think it is as good as the TRX-4. Even when the TRX-4 has its differentials locked, it can just maneuver better. But in terms of raw maneuverability, the Ecto is smaller, it's lighter, it's lower. It doesn't have to carry as much around with it, so it just, I mean, a couple corrections at the top, but it just pops right around with no issues whatsoever. Here I'm going to force the trio to navigate a particularly difficult line up this face, what I call the notch. There's that rock at the passenger side rear that will just, it tries to push the truck away from that rock, which in turn just lifts the nose end off the ground because it's so steep here. It's almost vertical for a little short section. So the TRX-4 can't manage it there, but I'm going to give everybody 3 tries at it. So same line, but just trying to get in between those two flat portions of rock. The TRX-4 suffering from, well, the Defender particularly suffering from that longer wheelbase and weight up especially high compared to even the other two. That's pretty well stuck. But we'll run at it again, because I don't think this is going to end very well, and it does not. But the third try is usually the charm. TRX takes basically the same run and just goes over it like nothing happened before. Same story with the SCX-10 It's going to come in the same entry. It's got the same sort of drawbacks as the Defender. It's a little long and its weight is a little higher than it need be to navigate this kind of an obstacle, and it falls in a hole. No getting out of that. So we reset and we try it again. Just run it right up the middle again. And like the TRX-4, it's just that tiny bit to one side or the other, and it's just straight up. Finishing it up, the Ecto, small, light, close to the ground. With some softer tires, it probably would have just driven up like this, like it was just driving on flat ground. But it took this with relatively no drama. Onto the good old loose dirt side hill. It's nice and smooth. The TRX-4 will, depending on the day, have a real tough time with this. It will just, the ground will go out from under it with no warning. But it clawed its way by. Took it relatively easily. SCX-10 coming around, following. Even easier, I think. The stock tires on both are good. I would give a slight edge to the stock tires for the SCX-10 Just a little more competent all around. And lastly, the Ecto, which, relying on its strengths, just drives around as if there's no hill at all. As I think I mentioned before, all 3 are running 5-pole brushed motors, an 8-turn in the Defender, Holmes Hobbies. I'm pretty sure it's a Holmes Hobbies 12-turn 5-pole in the SCX-10 and a 14-turn Reedy 5-pole in the Ecto. So here's just a quick little check on the drag brake. As soon as I get over that one problematic rock at the notch, I just let them free roll. So this right here is just the default drag brake setting. This is where it's holding it. It's not turned up or down on any of the speed controls. I would say the Ecto does somewhat poorly as light as it is, because that's rolling a little quicker than the other two, who are significantly heavier. On to Ancient Kingdom, which is one of the most difficult sections I have here. It's just so jagged and so steep that when the TRX-4 decided to just outdo itself and zoom right up at like nothing, I was genuinely surprised by that performance right there. The SCX-10 coming up in second place does not have as easy of a time. There's that underhang. If a wheel gets under there, it just propels the rig over backwards onto its roof. So the SCX-10 takes it a little wider and manages to find some good bite and up and over. This is the obstacle we're on the day. The Ecto did not have a good time. Its lower center of gravity and lower everything did not help it. It couldn't get bite. I'm guessing a combination of, again, the hard tires, the no portals, just the lack of weight pushing down on it. It couldn't even get over that little knob there at the beginning. And I think the only rollover of the day that the Ecto had was here, because these concrete chunks are very high bite, and if a tire gets in where you don't want it to be, it's just going to flip it over. But the Ecto, it took it a while, but it got through it. Still stuck a little bit. Now we get to what's basically a torture test for any of these. You enter over the brown rock there into the west face of Drybone Valley, and it's mean. It's knobby. The rocks are jagged. There's no concrete fill in this section at all. It's just dirt. So the dirt is exceptionally loose, and the rocks grab whether you want them to or not, and that result is not atypical of the experience on this particular line. So second try, the same entry, the brown rock and the gray rock side by side, and choosing how to attack that slab at the top is tricky. But the TRX-4 was having a day of it today. And not to be outdone, the SCX-10 just saw the line the TRX-4 took and said, anything you can do, I can do better, and just almost launches itself up. It's a little hung right there and just drives through. No problem. This is very similar to Ancient Kingdom. The Ecto struggled here. This is the type of terrain the Ecto isn't super suited for at its weight. Maybe adding some weight might help. Weighted wheels or knuckles, because it really struggled with this, and I have to give the edge in this one to the other two, particularly the SCX-10 because this wider line around the slab that the Ecto ends up having to run just to get to the top. I don't know if I'd consider it successful. This is just clawing, just trying to find any place where it can bite in. There was very little dirt kicked up by the other two, and the Ecto it's in the weeds here. It's really struggling, but in the end manages to make it around and get to the top. Now here, more important to some people than others is the amount of noise these things make. And the Ecto I found to be remarkably quiet compared to the other two. But there we have that dreaded stock digital servo jitter. The TRX-4 sounds a bit like a blender being run in another room, and again, there's that digital servo jitter. And last up, the SCX-10 about the same level of noisiness as the TRX-4. They have similar two-speed transmissions, so it's not particularly surprising. No jitter from the $20 servo, though. So, what's the takeaway here? I mean, is it a fair comparison? There are two arguably primarily trail trucks in the Defender and the SCX-10, and then something more along the lines of a pure crawler in the terms of the Ecto. But they are, I would say they're comparable. I just compared them. It's not exactly an apples and oranges. The Defender didn't get to use its two-speed, neither did the SCX-10. The Defender didn't unlock its diffs, and the SCX-10 didn't use its dig, which isn't hooked up, so that wasn't a problem. And I don't think the Ecto would do nearly as well as a trail truck as the other two. But I think crawling-wise, I was most surprised by the performance of the TRX-4, which I think, as its nature, is more of a trail truck that can also be a rock crawler. The SCX-10 is a rock crawler that can also be a trail truck, and the Ecto is a rock crawler that I guess you could trail it, but it tops out at around 6 miles an hour, and really flips over pretty easily if you try to turn it at any sort of speed on a flat surface. So, is there a winner here? No, I don't think so. I think they all stand on their own merits, and as outfitted, the Ecto is the cheapest at, I think, $399. The SCX-10 was the kit, which was $399. So add the electronics, and it's right up to the RTR spec of the TRX-4 Defender, which I would say if you're just going to crawl rocks, it's the Ecto. If you're going to do a little bit of everything, it's probably the Defender. And if you're going to split your time somewhere between trailing and climbing rocks, then it's the SCX-10 I mean, at least for me. Thanks for watching.